I did a debate a couple weeks ago against a preacher who seemed to have not only no understanding of science, but no appreciation for it, didn't care if he was fairly representing it. As a matter of fact, I think there's a chance you might have stood up and accosted him at some point, because he literally stood in front of me and said, "Oh, that evolution stuff, it's not like anybody's ever banged sticks and rocks together and got a puppy." He said this twice during the debate. The first time, we're in a debate structure, so I'm trying not to interrupt. I need to follow the rules of the debate. And the second time, I just halted and jumped right in, and I was like, "You're right, that's never happened, and no scientist has ever portrayed anything like that happening." And luckily, we were in a high school, and the students seemed to get it. But how do we work past not only just willful scientific ignorance, but we seem to have built communities where we haven't instilled any appreciation for it or any appreciation to treat it reasonably. Let's just throw up a straw man and call it nonsense.
I don't often quote Tony Blair, but he said, education, education, education. There is staggering ignorance of what evolution is all about. And, hello?
I think we're living in a simulation right now, and it's failing us. So, Richard, what do you do with this underlying misunderstanding of the role of randomness in evolution? Can you inoculate us against that problem?
Mutation is random, only in one sense, actually. Mutation is random only in the sense that it's not directed towards improvement, specifically. It's non-random in other senses. Natural selection is quintessentially non-random. That's exactly what natural selection is. Anybody who thinks that you could possibly explain the beauty and the elegance of living things by some kind of random process would be stark raving bonkers. Anybody who thinks that we think that has got to be stark raving bonkers. Of course it's not random. The whole point of the scientific enterprise in this case is to find an escape from randomness, is to find a solution to the problem of how you get these staggeringly non-random things which are living creatures out of the laws of physics. And that's what we're about. I mean, to explain that by postulating a creator, now that is in almost resorting to randomness. That's saying that complexity, non-randomness is another word for complexity, comes into being spontaneously by sheer luck. God just happened to be there. What natural selection, what evolution does, is to explain how you get there from simple beginnings, which are easy to understand, and how you work up gradually up a kind of ramp of improvement until you get to complexity. That's the whole point. We're trying to escape from randomness, and natural selection is the only escape that anybody has ever suggested that will work.
One of the things that troubled me is all of us have dealt with religious-minded individuals in debate-type formats. Here's a preacher who knew nothing, and it was proudly on display. And there's a part of me that says, should this individual be allowed to speak to children at all? And yet I have to defend this idea of freedom of expression, that people get to share their ideas. And that puts us in a place where we're constantly in a battle of ideas. How badly informed should somebody be before we just stop paying attention to them and work on the people who perhaps are reachable?
Well, the problem in that case is that the preacher represents, in the U.S., 35%, 45%, depending on what his convictions are, of the population. So it's not, you can ignore the preacher, but you can't ignore the fact that a significant minority, and on some questions a majority of Americans hold just patently absurd ideas. So it's the ideas that really matter.
He knew nothing, but he was proud of knowing nothing, it sounds to me. Well, a lot of us are ignorant of lots of things. I mean, I'm ignorant of very many things, and I'm sure you are as well. But we don't pontificate.
I've never heard it put so nicely.
We don't. But we admit when we're ignorant, and we don't try to pontificate about things of which we know nothing. Whereas he was doing exactly that.
In a way, it wasn't so much that I don't think he thinks he's ignorant. I don't think he's proud of his ignorance. I think he thinks he's convinced he has the right answer, and that we are all engaged in a scientific fairy tale. So there's like an extra layer of smug superiority over the top of it, where he gets to dismiss the work of countless scientists that have taught us the best current understanding of the diversity of life, and he gets to shrug it off with sticks and rocks.
Well,
And-
if we ever have to convene gatherings like this in hell, we'll know we did something wrong.
I'm pretty sure a part of that was in hell, but I maintain my composure.
I mean, that really is the thing. That's what completely changes the equation. The moment you believe you are certain, or even just have very good reason to believe, that this life is just a way station on the way to some eternity that you could get very, very wrong or very, very right, depending on what you believe. It's just that being your master algorithm, that makes a mockery of every pretense to human knowledge, no matter how technologically useful it is, no matter if it doesn't matter if we cure cancer with some future biology, and prayer has never worked for that. If you believe in heaven and hell, that really governs everything, it seems. So.
In a way, I don't think I mind his believing what he believes. What I mind is his thinking we believe what he thinks we believe.
Yes.
Because how could anybody be so stupid as to think that you can...
He simultaneously presented a straw man of evolution and evolutionary scientists and anybody who fell into that, I accept reality. I'm going to straw man you all with sticks and rocks. Now, we can laugh at it, and, if you feel like laughing at it some more, by all means. There's been lots of discussion about how best to engage on these. How much, for lack of a better phrase, how big of an asshole should you be? How much pushback should there be? How seriously should you take them? And quite frequently, someone will come up and present the idea that there are sophisticated theologians, that this preacher that I had a debate with is in one category, and some other academic, erudite theologians are in another category. Is that the case?
Well, there are sophisticated theologians who accept evolution, of course, and have no problem with that. And so our argument with them is a quite separate argument. I have met sophisticated theologians who believe pretty astonishing things, like believing literally that Jesus turned water into wine. And I thought sophisticated theologians had written all that stuff off and said, oh no, that's just metaphor, that's just a nice story, we don't really believe that anymore. But I have spoken to very, very highly qualified, sophisticated theologians, highly educated. They accept evolution totally, but yet they think Jesus turned water into wine and walked on water and rose from the dead and was born of a virgin. All very unscientific ideas, and still they call themselves sophisticated theologians.
Well, first we should acknowledge that sophistication is better insofar as it means moderation and less of a commitment to the most dangerous ideas. But my problem with so-called sophisticated theology is that no one ever admits where the sophistication is coming from. It's coming from a loss of faith in specific doctrines. I mean, it's getting hammered into them from the outside. So, now you might wonder, well, what about the Ten Commandments? What about thou shalt not murder? Well, the problem is the Ten Commandments simply give us more bad reasons to kill people. I mean, what are you supposed to do when your best friend breaks the Sabbath, or erects a graven image, or takes the Lord's name in vain?
You're supposed to kill him. And if you're unwilling to kill him, your neighbors are supposed to kill you. Is this really the best book we have on morality? Is it even a good book? Now, happily, most Christians and Jews now disregard the morality on offer in the Old Testament. And they rationalize the barbarity we find there by saying, oh, this was appropriate to the time, it was appropriate to the ancient world. The idea being that the Canaanites were so ill-behaved that just getting together a short list of reasons to kill your neighbor and sticking to it was a great improvement over the general barbarity of the time. No, it wasn't. It was within the moral compass of human beings then to recognize that killing somebody for adultery was evil. The Buddha managed it. Mahavira, the Jain patriarch, managed it. Numerous Greek philosophers managed it. So Jews and Christians are simply lying to themselves when they talk about the impediments to morality that prevailed in the 5th century BC. And the other thing to notice is that rationalizing the barbarism we find in the Old Testament merely renders it irrelevant. It doesn't render these books morally wise. I mean, it is faint praise indeed if the best that can be said of much of Scripture is that it can now be safely ignored. Now, and despite what Christians say on the subject, the New Testament isn't so good as to make the Bible a reliable basis of morality. In fact, much of the book is an embarrassment to anyone who would say it is a moral book, much less a perfectly moral book. And nowhere is this clearer than on the question of slavery. And the truth is, the Bible in its totality, Old Testament, New Testament, support slavery. If we recognize anything, if we converge on any point in ethical terms now, it's that slavery is evil. Nowhere in the Bible is this evil recognized, much less repudiated. The slaveholders of the South were on the winning side of a theological argument. They knew it. They never stopped talking about it. The best God does in the Old Testament is to admonish us not to beat our slaves so badly that we injure their eyes or their teeth, or not to beat them so badly with a rod that they die on the spot. If they die after a day or two, no problem. I think it should go without saying that this is not the kind of moral insight that got rid of slavery in the United States. Now, while man was made in the image of God, woman was made in the image of man, according to Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Her humanity, therefore, is derivative. It's ersatz. The Old Testament values the life of a woman at 1/2 to 2/3 that of a man. The Quran says that the testimony of 2 women is required to offset the testimony of 1 man. And every woman is deserving of 1/2 her brother's share of inheritance. But the biblical God has made it perfectly clear that women are expected to live in absolute subjugation to their fathers until the moment they are pressed into connubial service to their husbands. And the New Testament offers no relief. I mean, St. Paul put it in his letter to the Ephesians, "Wives, be subject to your husbands as to the Lord. For the husband is the head of the wife, as Christ is the head of the church. As the church is subject to Christ, so let wives be subject to their husbands in all things." The Quran delivers the same message. And on most translations, says that disobedient wives should be whipped or scourged or beaten. The 11th century sage Al-Ghazali, perhaps the most influential Muslim since Muhammad, described a woman's duties this way: she should stay at home and get on with her spinning. She should not go out often. She must not be well informed, nor must she be communicative with her neighbors, and only visit them when absolutely necessary. She should take care of her husband and respect him in his presence and in his absence and seek to satisfy him in everything. She must not leave the house without his permission, and if given his permission, she must leave surreptitiously. She should put on old clothes and take the deserted streets and alleys, avoid markets, make sure that a stranger does not hear her voice or recognize her. She must not speak to a friend of her husband's even in need. Her sole worry should be her virtue, her home as well as her prayers and her fast. If a friend of her husband calls when the latter is absent, she must not open the door nor reply to him in order to safeguard her and her husband's honor. She should accept what her husband gives her as sufficient sexual needs at any moment. She should be clean and ready to satisfy her husband's sexual needs at any moment. Now recall the blissful lives of women in Afghanistan under the Taliban, or think about the millions of women who even now are forced to wear the veil under Islam, or who are forced into these forced marriages with men they have never met. And you will realize that these kinds of religious opinions have consequences. The net effect of religion, especially in the Abrahamic tradition, has been to demonize female sexuality and portray women as morally and intellectually inferior to men. I mean, every woman, it is imagined, holds the honor of the men in her lives for ransom and is liable to tarnish it with a glance or destroy it outright through sexual indiscretion. In this context, rape is actually a crime that one man commits against another man. The woman is only shame's vehicle, and often culpably acquiescent, being all blandishments and guile and winking treachery. In the Old Testament, in Deuteronomy 22, God says that if a woman doesn't scream loudly enough while being raped, she should be stoned to death as an accessory to her own defilement. There's no escaping the view in the Bible and the Quran that women have been put on earth to serve men, to keep their homes in order, and to be incubators of sons. So I think this is a fact that really cannot be disputed. If we ever achieve a global civilization that truly values and honors the rights and capabilities of women, it will not be because we paid more attention to our holy books. So, to summarize, the basic claim that we get our morality from religion is clearly false. The claim that we're the only species that has moral impulses is also false. I mean, clearly, our ability to cooperate with one another can be explained in evolutionary terms. I mean, chimpanzees, with whom we share 99% of our DNA, find one another's emotional lives contagious, just as we do. They're motivated to reconcile after disputes, to comfort one another. Chimpanzees have even died trying to save other chimpanzees from drowning. They react negatively to situations that they perceive as unfair, like the unequal distribution of food. Given how gregarious all primates are, it is not a surprise that evolution would have selected for a variety of ethical concerns and social instincts. Now, religious people, I think, are right to believe that our morality isn't merely a product of culture. I mean, it is deeply hardwired in us. And it clearly is massively empowered by our ability to speak and to write. I mean, language gives us the capacity to extend our moral horizons beyond our mere family and kin, and even beyond our species. But it's also, it should be pointed out, that language also empowers our hatred and stupidity to a remarkable degree. And we are the only species, to my knowledge, that can forsake life-saving medical research, demonize homosexuals, or fly planes into buildings because of what we tell one another about God. The fact is, the basic fact is, on this point of morality, is that we decide what is good in our good books. I mean, we come to the Bible and we see that it says in Leviticus, if a woman is not a virgin on her wedding night, you're supposed to stone her to death on her father's doorstep. We choose to reject this pearl of ancient wisdom. And then we choose to emphasize something like the golden rule. So that the guarantor of our morality is in our brains, not in our books. So I've spoken about the problems in arguing that religion is true and in arguing that religion is useful. The last way of defending God is to argue that atheism is dogmatic, intolerant, or otherwise worthy of reproach. Now, as I pointed out in my second book, Letter to a Christian Nation, atheism is really a term we do not need. I mean, in the same way that we don't have a word for someone who's not an astrologer. You know, We don't have websites for non-astrologers. There are no groups for non-astrologers. Nobody wakes up in the morning feeling the need to remind himself that he's not an astrologer. You all remember the recent presidential debate where 3 Republican candidates for the presidency solemnly raised their hands to testify that they don't believe in evolution. And there was no follow-up question. This is embarrassing. And it seems like every few months the opinion page of the New York Times publishes another defense of this kind of ignorance. There's no question that this is eroding our stature in the eyes of the rest of the developed world. It's not arrogant or dogmatic to point this out. It seems to me that our intellectual honesty lives or dies in this trench. Now, it's also commonly imagined that atheists think there is nothing beyond human life and human understanding. The truth is that atheists are free to admit that there's much about the universe we don't understand. It is obvious we don't understand the universe. But it is even more obvious that neither the Bible nor the Quran reflects our best understanding of it. There could be life on other planets, complex life, technically accomplished civilizations. Just imagine a civilization 1 million years old as opposed to a few thousand. Atheists are free to imagine this possibility. They're also free to admit that if such brilliant extraterrestrials exist, the Bible and the Quran are going to be even less impressive to them than they are to human atheists. It's often imagined that atheists are in principle closed to spiritual experience. But the truth is that there's nothing that prevents an atheist from experiencing self-transcending love, or ecstasy, or rapture, or awe. In fact, there's nothing that prevents an atheist from going into a cave for a year or a decade and practicing meditation like a proper mystic. What atheists don't tend to do is make unjustified and unjustifiable claims about the cosmos on the basis of those experiences. Now, there's no question that disciplines like meditation and prayer can have a profound effect upon the human mind. But do the positive experiences of, say, Christian mystics over the ages suggest that Jesus is the sole savior of humanity? Not even remotely, because Christians have been having these experiences, but so have Buddhists and Muslims and even atheists. So there's a deeper reality here, and it makes a mockery of religious denominations. The fact is that whenever human beings make an honest effort to get at the truth, they reliably transcend the accidents of their birth and upbringing. Just as it would be absurd to speak about Christian physics, though the Christians invented physics. And it would be absurd to speak about Muslim algebra, though the Muslims invented algebra. It will one day be absurd to speak about Christian or Muslim ethics or spirituality. And whatever is true about our circumstance in ethical and spiritual terms is discoverable now and can be articulated without offending all that we've come to understand about the nature of the universe. And certainly without making divisive claims about the unique sanctity of any book or pegging these most beautiful features of our lives to rumors of ancient miracles. Finally, there's this notion that atheism is responsible for the greatest crimes in the 20th century. Now, this is actually, it's quite amazing to me. This is the most frequent objection I come across, so I think I should deal with it briefly. It is amazing how many people think that the crimes of Hitler and Pol Pot and Mao were the result of atheism. The truth is, this is a total misconstrual of what went on in those societies and of the psychological and social forces that allow people to follow their dear leader over the brink. The problem with fascism and communism was not that they were too critical of religion. The problem is they're too much like religions. These are utterly dogmatic systems of thought. I recently had a debate with Rick Warren in the pages of Newsweek, and he suggested that North Korea was a model atheist society and that any atheist with the courage of his convictions should want to move there. The truth is, North Korea is organized exactly like a faith-based cult, centered on the worship of Kim Jong-il. The North Koreans apparently believe that the shipments of food aid that they receive from us to keep them from starving to death are actually devotional offerings to Kim Jong-il. Is too little faith really the problem with North Korea? Is too much skeptical inquiry what is wrong here? Yes, Auschwitz, the Gulag, and the killing fields are not the product of atheism. They're the product of other dogmas run amok: nationalism, political dogma. Hitler did not engineer a genocide in Europe because of atheism. In fact, Hitler doesn't even appear to have been an atheist. He regularly invoked Jesus in his speeches. But that's beside the point. He did it on the basis of other beliefs, dogmas about Jews and the purity of German blood. The history of Muslim jihad, however, does have something to do with Islam. The atrocities of September 11th did have something to do with what 19 men believed about martyrdom and paradise. The fact that we're not funding stem cell research at the federal level does have something to do with what Christians believe about conception and the human soul. It's important to focus on the specific consequences of specific ideas. So I want to make it very clear that I am not holding religion responsible for every bad thing that a religious person has done in human history, to be balanced against all the bad things that atheists have done. I'm only holding religion responsible for what people do and will continue to do explicitly for religious reasons. So I submit to you that there really is no society in human history that has ever suffered because its population became too reasonable, too reluctant to embrace dogma, or too demanding of evidence. So in conclusion, let me say that I think civilization in the 21st century is passing through a bottleneck of sorts, formed on the one side by 21st century destructive technology, and on the other by Iron Age superstition. And we will either pass through this bottleneck, more or less intact, more or less painfully, or we'll destroy ourselves. Now, perhaps this fear sounds grandiose to some of you, but the truth is that civilizations can end. In fact, every civilization in human history virtually has ended. Over and over again in history, some unlucky generation has had to witness the ruination of everything they and their ancestors had worked hard to build. We are a part of history. There is no guarantee that things can't go spectacularly wrong for us. In fact, it's an article of faith in many religious communities that things will go spectacularly wrong, and that this is a good thing. 79% of Americans think that Jesus is going to come down out of the clouds and rectify all of our problems with his magic powers at some point in history. 20% of Americans claim to be certain that it will happen in their lifetime. This is precisely the sort of thinking we do not need. And I think it should be rather obvious that prophecies about the end of the world could well be self-fulfilling.
We're going to try to get to the core of some of what you raised and then get to some questions. That ran long, but I think it was very fruitful. I want to distill something that came up here, two important things. One is the question of authority in Islam. A scholar once told me that he thinks the problem with Islam is that every Tom, Dick, and Harry can give fatwa, and that there's no pope, there's no magisterium, and so in some ways what you have is leadership by whoever has, the biggest audience. Now, right now, one of the most revered scholars is Yusuf al-Qaradawi, and he says he takes an opposite position from Professor Ramadan on the question of suicide attacks in Israel. He has a program with 40 million listeners, and he has a website, and he says that suicide attacks on Israeli citizens, even women and children, are acceptable because all of Israel is a militarized society and all citizens are combatants. So the question here is, he has, he's got this very large audience, and since there is no arbitrating authority, there's no single authority, is not what Islam becomes whoever has the biggest audience, has the sway in what the faith is?
I think that I think it's true. If we look at what is happening now in the Muslim majority countries as well as in the West, that there is something that we can call a crisis of authority. In the book Radical Reform, I'm tackling this from many viewpoints, and not only from political discussion. It's really even in our way to deal with sciences, human sciences, ethics. We have this problem. When you don't know how to manage diversity, it ends up with division and not knowing who is leading. And this is the way. We don't have a church, so we have diversity in Islam. So we have to know how to manage this, and it's problematic.
Well, I'm certainly not going to criticize Islam for not having a pope. And in fact, it would be your vis-a-vis in this discussion was horribly in error in any case, in that Christianity never had only one pope, and still doesn't. I mean, there were several Catholic claimants to the papacy at different times, just among Roman Catholics. But today, I mentioned one of them, the Pope of the Coptic Christians based in Cairo. The Eastern Orthodox don't call their leader the Pope, they call him the Patriarch, but the Christian world is full of Pope types, usually anathematizing one another. The Pope is just the word that innocent Americans use for the man who claims to be the leader of the Roman Catholics. So I don't think it's possible, in fact, to have a moral authority within religion, because I think the two things are so sharply divorced. But this doesn't lead to just chaos, because, and it certainly doesn't lead to the dictatorship of minorities or extremists. I'll give you two examples quickly. In the case of the moral blackmail of Denmark that was backed up by a physical threat to destroy its economy and burn out its embassies across the world, well-coordinated attack of sabotage against a small European democracy. The organizing group was a thing called the OIC, the Organization of the Islamic Congress. Groups all the Muslim countries in the world. It's an increasingly powerful lobby at the United Nations, hopes to pass an international resolution forbidding all criticism of religion, all forms of blasphemy and profanity. Every ambassador of those countries in Copenhagen went to Mr. Rasmussen, the Prime Minister of Denmark, and told him, under the threat of violence, he should change his law so as to allow him to determine what went into the Danish newspapers. And when he said he couldn't do that, things got a lot worse. Now, that's the ambassador of Egypt, and the ambassador of Turkey, and the ambassador of Algeria, important countries, in the case of Egypt, containing an enormous Christian population, coming to you as if they spoke for a religion. Either this claim is true or it is not. It's self-evidently not true, but it is certainly made. Let's be in any doubt about it. And let's have any doubt that it means to extend its influence over the people who are sitting in this hall. Second, very quick, the fatwa against Salman Rushdie, in other words, the offer of money to suborn murder for the crime of writing a work of fiction in his own name by the spiritual leader of Shia Islam, that's what the fatwa meant then, means now, was, after the murder of many people, associated or not with the publication of the book, repudiated ostensibly by the Iranian government after long pressure and lobbying at the United Nations, about 10 years ago, I think that was. But I've been since then, I've had the pleasure of going to Friday prayers at Tehran University, twice, to hear the sermon. And on both occasions, there were banners and slogans saying that the Imam's holy sentence against Salman Rushdie will never die. It hasn't died with the Imam. Khomeini's death warrant will always be carried out. Not, I think, a very good use of the premises of a university. I can't speak for whether it's a good occasion for Friday prayers or not. Well, it brings me to a second point. You see, there's something shady involved here. Some people say that Islam and Islamists give themselves permission to lie to non-believers. It sounds like the sort of vulgar, paranoid thing that an Islamophobe would go around saying, doesn't it? It's very easy to disprove, except that it hasn't been, as that example will just illustrate. And these are not minor threats. These are threats to the very core of what we believe is the essential thing for a society, which is the ability to ask questions, to read the books we choose, to pursue unfettered investigations. And these are flatly negated by the claims of a religion that says it is the answer to everything.
Can I respond to this? Because
Yes.
really, I think
I think
that
you must.
no,
Is the taqiyya question?
no. The taqiyya question is no. The point is, on the cartoon issue, the way you are translating things is problematic. Let me just come to some of the facts here very quickly. The first thing is that it happened in October that the cartoon were published. Between October till January, nothing happened. And I met the Muslim organizations in Denmark, and I told them, and many were of the opinion, don't react. The ambassadors of Muslim majority countries and Arab countries mainly asked the prime minister to meet with them. He refused. And my position that he made a mistake here, because he should have met them, telling them, I have no say in this. It has to do with freedom of media. This is not of my business. He didn't do this. They took it as humiliation. They went back. They bought the tickets. No, but look.
Easily.
No, let me finish, because we will come to the point here. They went back and they bought the ticket of a group of Muslims, among them Muslim leaders in Denmark, to go to Muslim majority countries to just present what was done. Tell me, Egypt is ruled by Islam? Is it Islam which is used there? Mubarak is a secular president, isn't it? Syria is a Muslim leader or is a secular state? All the main societies where the government used this, because you know what happened, is it's easier to use the people to tell them against the West you can demonstrate, but not against the government, which is an autocratic government. So it's not religion, it's political instrumentalization of popular emotions against the West just to make it a religious issue. You cannot just avoid talking about political instrumentalization of countries where there is no democracy. And these countries are not Islamist countries, they are secular, autocratic countries.
On your third point, I can't possibly disagree with you. Of course, there's a great deal of opportunism and demagogy, and I'm certain hypocrisy as well. And in fact, I will say that I've heard you and seen you saying that before, and I agree. I don't think I would classify a country that hauls the Christian leader of its minority onto the TV to say, no, it's not possible that there have been any
exactly the same political instrumentalization.
No, to give you a trivial example.
Instrumentalization.
No, I would not. Nor would I describe the Alawite regime. It's an Alawite sectarian regime, not a secular one, that is funded by Tehran and is the funder of the murder gang Hezbollah as secular either. No, don't insult me. Not that it really hurts me that much. I don't feel humiliated or anything.
All right,
No,
we're going
apparently,
to take some
apparently the
questions.
leader of a proud country like Egypt, when a demand he makes to interfere in the internal affairs of Denmark is not met, feels
I'm sorry, just to end this discussion for me on my side is the only fact that you acknowledge that there is a political instrumentalization of religion and you say I'm right, that's enough for me. This is exactly what I mean.
Good. Can we wind that one up? I actually think that...
And
that,
earlier you were
think that
trying
was-
to tell me what Karl Marx said on the subject.
That's your job.
Was that a valuable exchange? I think that was worth hearing out. But I know that there are people in the room and also listening in from the satellite sites who want to have some of their questions asked. And a few of them are along these lines, and they actually are aimed at you, Mr. Hitchens, because of your ringing endorsement, really, of a secular society and atheism. A question from Vail, Colorado. Do Jewish, Christian, or other religions have a greater claim on being religions of peace than Islam? I mean, is your beef really with Islam, or is it with all religion?
Well, I'm sorry the comrade from Yale tuned in so late. I mean, late enough to miss the first 4 or 5 minutes of my 10-minute introduction, devoted to a close exegesis of Professor McCulloch's realization that Christianity had out-genocided and out-warred and out-crusaded itself, finally by 1914. If you care to pick up, I think you might be able to, and I'll sign it if you will, pick it up. My book, God is Not Great. You will find a discussion of the warrants for slavery, murder, genocide, and land theft that occur in the books of Moses, and that are an ineffaceable offense to any civilized person, and the reason why so many Jews are secular, at least one of the reasons. So again, I could go on, but I really feel I don't need to.
Okay. A corollary question, maybe it's just something funny. Would atheism be a non-religion of peace?
No.
Somewhere here.
No, there's something probably very slightly intolerant about atheism, at least so I hope. I might just say, though, because I really think Professor Ramadan misunderstood me. When I say the American Constitution is godless, I mean, I was quoting the title of a famous study of it by Professor Israel Kramnik. What I mean by that is to say, the US Constitution only mentions religion and God in its preambles when it means to say the ways in which they must be kept out of the public square. That happens to be a fact about our Constitution and the reason why we still have it. Otherwise, the Republic would have been destroyed long before. And that its First Amendment says that religion can be no business of the government, a statement no Muslim society could begin to make. Thank you.
But once again, you can just refer to the Constitution, and you will have Muslims just referring to text and avoiding the practical consequences and sometimes the policies that are promoted in one country. And remember that the previous president, George W. Bush, was talking when going not for the same reasons as you, or not from the same source, because you were supporting the war in Iraq, but he was doing it in the name of God. So the Constitution here is not preventing someone from within to speak in the name of God, even if he's supporting exactly the same thing that in the name of the peace that you are promoting, you were for the war in Iraq.
I can't imagine you're going to defend President Bush here.
Well, from that, from that charge, I can. No one was ever summoned to vote for the war in Iraq in the name of God, and the president's own church, as well as every other Christian church that I know of, was opposed to the war, for whatever little difference that might make. None to me.
Right. We have a few questions here. I don't think we can avoid this tonight about Sharia. It's become a kind of an assumption among many Americans now that what Muslims are really after is the imposition of Sharia in every society in which they live, even Muslim minority countries. And it's not a lot understood about Sharia, but what is known is that crimes such as adultery, blasphemy, apostasy, and homosexuality are punishable by the death penalty. And to Westernize, this seems like a whole legal system that's a violation of human rights. So what is the intention with Sharia, especially for Muslims living in the West? Is the idea that eventually we get there and we all live under Sharia law?
You know, this is a legitimate question, and it's an important question, because many Muslims living, not only in the West, by the way, throughout the world, you have Muslims, they deny this. They say, no, they don't understand Sharia, or they reduce Sharia to the penal code, and sometimes it happens. But Sharia is not the penal code, and still with this, that it's not only the penal code, we really have a problem with the understanding of Sharia by Muslims and the way it has to be understood in our time. And once again, many interpretations here. You have some Muslims, and you cannot deny this. Their perception of Sharia, it starts with the punishment, and then it goes towards social justice. Because you punish, you go to... And this is, for me, once again, problematic, and I'm critical of this, But I cannot deny the fact that you have a tiny minority of Muslim scholars, they think like that. In Nigeria, in Saudi Arabia, in Egypt, everywhere. You have another understanding of Sharia, which is we start with social justice and then the punishment is part of the whole process. And my position, I wrote many times on that, for example, in Western Muslims and the Future of Islam, the understanding of Sharia is the way towards faithfulness, in which way we are faithful to some of our principles. So it's not a closed system.
Well, Sharia just means law. I mean, all the people who say Sharia law are making an elementary mistake, and of course it's not the case that every thief has their hand lopped off in Muslim society or every adulterer gets stoned. And so, and I'm perfectly sure that's not just because it would diminish the labor force so radically, or so to speak, disable it. I think it's more because of something I've claimed to notice elsewhere, which is that religion is man-made. And so there are enormous discrepancies in how these things are promulgated and also how they are enforced. And most countries and societies come quite early and easily to the conclusion that their own religions are, in one form or another, not really practicable. After all, in Saudi Arabia, a woman can't even drive a car, whereas in Iran she can vote, not for much, but she can, as much as a man can, let's say. Her vote can be stolen and degraded as much as her husband's or her brother's. There's an infinite variation. I don't know. I can't shake what I saw once on the BBC from someone whose career in London I followed. I don't know if you know him. You wouldn't like him. A guy called Anjum Chowdhury. He's a very well-known noisemaker around London, complaining about secularism, Judaism, all this kind of thing. And he's been in trouble with the law a few times, and was interviewed on the BBC, went on about how nothing would change until the green flag of Islam was flying over Downing Street and Buckingham Palace and so forth. And was asked, I thought quite mildly by the BBC interviewer, he said, well, if this is the way you feel about Sharia and about total Islamic rule, wouldn't you feel happier moving to a country where they already had it? And which is, a polite question, but a rather cheap one. But still. What didn't prepare me for the answer? Chowdhury looked straight at the guy and straight into camera and said, what makes you think this is your country? I thought it was a very good question. Now, why do you feel, I think I know partly why you feel, why do you feel it's necessary to affirm that? And of course a Muslim should learn the language, should obey the laws, should observe the customs and so on. Most immigrants don't feel they, so to speak, absolutely have to say that. The answer, I suspect, is that it's embarrassing to notice that in places like as far apart as Sweden and as Spain, there are groups of people who say their countries should be part of the caliphate and that that's why they've come here. And if it wasn't for those people, you wouldn't be in this position. So it seems to me that in order to be consistent, you should fear them and dislike them, find them morally and intellectually repulsive, at least as much as, if not more, than I do. And I don't say that you don't, but I do think that is the urgent priority. On the lady's question about where would be the best country to live if you were a Muslim and wanting to be a member of a sexual or gender minority, or I think she said a female or a homosexual. So hard to confuse. Actually, the easiest place for you to live in that case would probably be, I was thinking about it while Professor Ramadan was talking, would probably be, this will be my closing statement, would almost certainly be either Bosnia-Herzegovina or Kosovo. Culturally Muslim, democratic, open societies in southern and Balkan Europe that were saved from obliteration by the power of the United States, which has never had a word of thanks for what it did in that matter. and which remains a secular country with a godless constitution.
Guys, I'll admit, the Bible does contain a lot of verses that can be deeply inspiring and consoling to people going through a hard time. I admit that. My only issue is, as Sam Harris explained, the Bible isn't unique in that many ancient texts contain the same, if not a more amount of inspiring content, and that's where we get all the amazing legends from Hercules and the sorts. And even worse, in addition to the inspiring and consoling verses, the Bible also happens to contain some of the most disturbing verses that should strike anyone with a moral code as morally disgusting, man. So, in today's video, we're going to take a look at some of those and we'll jump right in and ask, do you think colonialism and genocide are evil and should go against any sensible person's sense of fairness and justice? Well, the God of Judea would like to disagree. Judges chapter 18 verses 1 to 28. And in those days, the tribes of the Danites were seeking a place of their own where they might settle because they had not yet come into an inheritance among the tribes of Israel. So the Danites sent 5 of their leading men from Zorah and Eshtaol to spy out the land and exploit. These men represented all the Danites. Then they said to the priest, please inquire of God to learn whether our journey will be successful. The priest answered them, go in peace, guys. Your journey has the Lord's approval. So the 5 men left and came to Laish, where they saw that the people were living in safety, like the Sidonians, at peace and secure. And since the land lacked nothing, they were prosperous. When they returned to Zorah and Eshtaol, the fellow Danites asked them, how did you find things? They answered, come on, let's attack them. We have seen the land and it's very good, man. Don't hesitate to go there and take it over. And when you get there, you will find an unsuspecting people and a spacious land that God has put into your hands. A land that lacks nothing whatever. Then 600 men of the Danites armed for battle set out from Zorah and Eshtaol. Then they took what Micah had made and his priests and went on to Laish against the people at peace and secure. They attacked them with the sword and burned down their city. The Danites rebuilt the city and settled there. I'm sorry that was a long one, but I had to read as much of it as possible to ensure that I gave you sufficient context to understand what's going on. So, as you've just seen, God approved the massacre of an entire peaceful people just so that one of his tribes could have a place to live, man. He is all powerful, but he couldn't transform a patch of desert somewhere and give it to his chosen people. No, instead, he sanctioned the eradication of an entirely harmless community. Man. And when Christian apologists are preaching passages like these in their churches or whatever, they embellish the stories by adding that the people were depraved and immoral or evil and wicked. But in this case, even the Bible recognizes that these people are peaceful and secure, just living their lives. Unless, according to these believers, not worshipping the God of Israel is what qualifies one as morally depraved. Man. Deeply sad, man. You know, guys, I remember Sam Harris saying in a recent video that I posted a while back that beliefs do have consequences, man. Apologies just want us to believe that belief is this cute little thing that people have in search of hope and in their effort to interact with the surrounding nature. Or just where you surrender yourself to a higher power and nothing negative could really come out of it, man. But that's really the case. In actuality, let's take what's happening in the Middle East as an example, and no, I'm not talking about the Islamic terrorism that will be akin to eating a dead horse. Let's talk about what the 51st state of the United States is unleashing in the region at the moment. Now, regardless of what you think about the conflict, who started it and all that, I doubt anyone with an ounce of empathy and capacity for critical thinking would deny that there are countless times since last year that Israel's army took things literally too far, man. Virtually every single human rights body across the world agrees on that point. And yet, man, around the world, we've seen religious people defend their unconditional support for Israel and tying it to the promises that God made in the Bible. Same thing. those who stand against or with Israel, blah, 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 blah. I actually have family members that explicitly told me that there isn't a single thing that Israel could do that will turn off their support for the nation, man. And these are people that I know will never hurt a fly, but simply due to their belief in the Bible, they have no problem watching the eradication of an entire people, simply because, man. Moving on. This next verse I learned about from Dan Baker, one of the best speakers that I've ever heard on the subject of religion versus science. Or religion versus common sense, as I like to put it. I stole it from my YouTube comment section. Anyway, the verse in question is Psalm chapter 137 verses 9, and it says, "Happy is the one who seizes your infants and dashes them against the rocks." Now, the first time I read this verse, it sounded like a setup to a really great joke, like there was a moral lesson about letting go and embracing the afterlife that would come after that or some shit, man. But no, that wasn't it at all. Now, the argument made by most Christian apologists is that this verse was written during the Babylonian exile, and the text is supposed to exemplify the emotions of a devastated people. And all I can think is, then why the would that matter? First, when is it ever okay to target children? That is a horrific concept by any person standards. I mean, it's literally the only line that will get you ended in prison if you cross it, man. But here, the Lord declares that happy are those that hurt infants. Man. And according to them, he did this, so what, man? Just so he can sound relatable to his people, man. And that's not all, actually, ladies and gentlemen. As you may have noticed, the Bible in this verse just doesn't describe and endorse an act of violence. It declares the act of violence will make the guys happy. Basically, a twisted delight in the suffering of others, man. I believe I'm not the crazy one if I declare that this verse doesn't belong anywhere near something that is associated with love, mercy, and forgiveness. Am I right, my G's, man? Anyway, today's video was an interesting one, and I hope that you loved all the arguments made throughout the video, man. And our overview of the Bible's worst series. Please let me know what you think in the comment section below, and do not forget to smash the like button so YouTube can recommend the video to even more people who might need to hear it. Thanks, guys. Stay safe. Enjoy the holidays. Peace.